Welcome, everybody. Today we have the pleasure of chatting with Arden Lewis, who's the executive chef at Comal Heritage Food Incubator, and Silvia Hérnandez Estrada, who's a participant at Comal. Thank you both.
No, for inviting us. Hi, guys.
Yeah.
We are going to be chatting about cross-cultural communication today. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Arden.
Right.
Could you tell us a bit about Comal for those of us who might not be familiar?
Right. So as Alexandra stated, my name is Arden Lewis. I am the executive chef at Comal Heritage Food Incubator. Comal Heritage Food Incubator, it's a social enterprise with a mission to foster, develop food-based entrepreneurs. And by doing that, we provide an economic platform as well. It was launched back in 2016, a little over 3 years ago. It started with a group of women. Silvia is one of them. Hi, Silvia. That came from the global Ilaria Swansea area and saw a need to develop their skills and their natural talent for cooking. Many of the women who came in saw this talent that they have for cooking food. They've done it for friends, family, and wanted to learn how to turn that into a business, and went to Focus Points Family Resource Center, which is our parent organization, to see how that could happen. And through discussions and working with the organization, in October 2016, Comal Heritage Food Incubator was formed. The name, the logo, the idea is truly part of the community, as it came from the community. The name Comal came from the community. It was a real, true grassroots group community effort. So this restaurant, it was formed in that direct response to the community need, and it works in two ways. It's a earn while you learn platform. So we try to forego, even though you might have education that's free, right? It's never free, right? Your time is worth something, and so we want to kind of fill that gap where economically it may not be feasible to get a free education. So we do an earn while you learn program, and part of that is a commercial training program where you learn how to work in the kitchen. And you learn the ins and outs. You learn the standards that are set forth by health and safety, sanitation regulations here in the state of Colorado. But we also provide a platform to build a business if you choose to build a business. So we have an entrepreneurship track that focuses right now in the catering arena, definitely with the ability to grow beyond that. But catering is a really good and unique way to learn how to manage your own business. And so we, like I said, we do a profit sharing for the catering portion of that, so that the entrepreneurs kind of get an idea of what it's like to manage the money, hire, what expenses look like, and kind of really learn how to build a business, but with the grace and educational resources that Comal provides. And so with that being said, the kitchen itself, we have an 18 to 24 month commercial kitchen training program, definitely individualized and customized for each person. It's not necessarily a standardized thing. No one is standardized. People are different. We have different experiences, we come from different backgrounds. We have different barriers and obstacles that we each face. And so we work with everyone, we meet everyone where they are, but we also kind of push them to be where they should be at the same time. So it's a nice little symbiotic relationship that we have. As I mentioned, Silvia, who you see there, she is one of our founding members. She also has her own business, La Catrina Grill. You might see it in the background there, that she has started. And Silvia also will be bringing to the table her experience coming to Denver from Mexico and starting her business here. And I'll let Silvia start off with that conversation on cross-cultural communication and kind of her perspective on that. You're on mute.
Oh, Sorry. I would like to make a little bit of a small review of my history. Um, I'm 49 years old. I have two kids, one girl, one daughter, and I am originally born in Mexico City. And I was living in Mexico City and in Puerto Vallarta. Those two places is where I spend most of my time. And then I moved in 2013 to Denver without being never in US, never know anything about US, how to, how to make things here happen into US. And in that year, I started having an idea about how to open a business, and it's how I get in contact with another ladies, and we make a group of people, most ladies that wanted to open a business. At the beginning, I didn't know exactly what type of business I want. I was, I get some suggestions from people like, oh, you should open a food truck or you should open a restaurant. But I was like, okay, those things need money. So, and plus, I didn't know anything about how to manage a restaurant or that kind of type of business. And if I didn't know in Mexico, imagine how hard it was for me to come to Denver and to try to open a business without knowing anything. I mean, no regulations. It's really different about Mexico and US opening a business. I had that idea before. I studied culinary. I studied gastronomy in Mexico when I was 18, so that was a long time ago. So I have kind of an idea what a food industry is, but never opened a business. So in Mexico, you don't need all those regulations like here. Like, for example, I learned in all these years about commissary kitchens that you need to be certified for food handle, managed food. And we don't need those ones in Mexico. So it was really hard for me to cross that, that understanding to come to US and trying to open a business. And I really couldn't do it without the help of Focus Points and Comal also, because it's where I really get most of my training about accounting, about how to do really recipe. We don't really, I think in Mexico we don't really work about that list of ingredients, like that kind of type of professional. If you want to open a business like here, you really need to do it here because food cost is very important. How you prepare your food is very important. And now I learn a lot of things here that I need to learn more in US. So that will be my experience about coming here into Denver. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy that I open my business at the same time that Comal opens the doors, because was a learning together between Comal, me, and my business. So that was really good.
So I'll just jump in real quick. Sylvia, when you were thinking about opening your business when you first came in to the States, and if you think about it then versus now, what changed? Did you have any obstacles, I guess, in the menu you're creating? Maybe, if were there any dishes or any processes maybe you were like, you know what, I think I have to rework what I'm doing because I'm in Denver, and maybe you have to do a little bit of. Were there any educational add-ons that you had to do when you were like creating a menu to inform maybe the audience about where you were coming from? Like, were you thinking about how to communicate your heritage, whether it was from your time in Mexico City or Puerto Vallarta, and what it would look like for you when you were trying to communicate your heritage, but also do something you enjoy, like cook your food in Denver?
Yeah, I think at the beginning when I was trying to open a business, I was thinking about, in Mexico we have a big old, we call it, that's why we call Comal. We have a little, like a flat iron thing that we make tortillas and we make food there. So at the beginning, my idea was to open like a business, and I was thinking about I will be in the street, same as in Mexico, with a little tenant and with my comal and making tortillas in front of each other. And then that was me. I wanted to do it that way because that's my tradition and my heritage. But then I find out here, like they says, no, you cannot make tortillas in the street. You cannot have a little comal on the street and making the food just right there. So then I find out a lot of things that I start, rebuilding my menu and rebuilding my ideas about how to create my business. That's why I start with catering, because what's more easy for me for now, like going over all those things, like start with the catering and at the same time learn. So that was my experience about that part.
Did you experience any obstacles or challenges because at Comal we have a few different cultures, right? So it's grown into more than what it started as any successful growing organization should, right? We have now served Mexican participants from different regions. We have served El Salvadorian, Venezuelan, participants from Jordan, Syria, Ethiopia, and even before my time, I think Silvia has worked with just about all of those cultures together.
Yeah.
Did you experience any obstacles, even similarities, just working? Did you discover anything like, oh, you do that too, from a culture that was completely separate from yours, or did you experience any differences that you had to learn about in communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe communication styles are different.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that experience?
Yeah, when I was all this time that I've been in Comal, the same as Chef Arden mentioned, I've been working with the different cultures, and communication between us is it's a learning, even that learning culture from each other there, because I understand now the people from Syria has a different traditions. Like, for example, I learned from people of Syria that they don't eat pork. I didn't know that culture really and why they don't eat pork. So also that means when I am working with someone of them, I cannot tell them to prep some pork or cook some pork because it's from the culture that they cannot do it, and I have to understand that. So that brings me like ideas about, okay, if I have a business, it's very important for me to know them culture and what they are open to do. Imagine if they work for me. So I need to, that's a learning too. And the other thing that I learned from them too is like they have similarities about food. I was talking the other day with Diane, one of the other participants, and we was talking about the rice pudding. Like they have kind of similar rice pudding, but they put water rose and some other ingredient extra. And when we cook and we see each other cooking in the kitchen, then we say, oh, you do that too. Oh, I use it too, but we call it this and we call it that. And then they start asking us, oh, you put chile. Why you put chile? And the other day I saw Bian adding some of the California chile on her recipe. And so it's nice. So it's similarities, and at the same time it's some obstacles together. But I think everything comes together in the learning process. The more we work together, the more we learn each other, and the more we learn about our each culture there.
Yeah, exactly. I would say for myself, working at Comal as well, I think from like a teaching and managing perspective, I came from New York, which is, culturally different from Denver when it came to working. Specifically, work-life balance is a thing, right? So understanding, when back in New York, when it was like, oh, I'm really tired, I'm on my 19th hour, I'd love to go home now. It was not necessarily something you could say out loud and have it seen as like, oh yeah, you deserve that. Whereas here, I feel like there's definitely a cultural, it's ingrained in the culture here, at least for me, from my perspective, that I see that, we care about your work-life balance. You've worked enough hours. You should probably manage your own time so that you can have this work-life balance. And that kind of is an example kind of how, like, even within the United States, even within the same country, you have different cultures, right? I learned that in Mexico. I learned that at Comal with specifically with Mexican participants. As much as I dealt with Mexican employees in New York, the majority of them, as I found out, were from Puebla, which is different from any region that I'm working with now, and they're all different, right? So I've noticed like food from Durango has a different flavor than food from like Mexico City or like Puerto Vallarta, right? Coastal flavors different from city flavors. The ingredients that they use are different based on where you are. And we learned that, I'm learning that a little bit more at Comal, how like, the history of where people have grown up really informs like the food that they're cooking, right? And the food that they're cooking really informs their culture. I think around the world, we see that food is like the connector for people in their culture, right? Everyone sits around a table and has stories of when they were kids or growing up about food and how it's specific to their culture, and they identify that meal as part of their culture, right? And I think that seeing that at Comal is kind of like taking like globalization and making it this really kind of like micro view rather of this macro globalization. We see participants from Syria and Mexico coming in, and now we have a participant from Syria seeing an ingredient like California chili is being used and understanding that this can also be used in my dish, right? Understanding that you can take a dough like pita bread and kind of, with a couple changes, turn it into a dough that makes telera bread for tortas, right? There's some similarities in the processes that we use, but there are also some differences based on where we came from. As far as like communication, I've noticed also that like, cultures communicate differently. And if you don't understand that cultures communicate differently, you start, you'll take, well, I would take that communication at face value based on my experience, not understanding that, hey, the tone that someone may be using with me is not necessarily the way that I would use that tone, right? So if I'm speaking, loudly to somebody else, it may not be loud to me. I may just be raising my voice to convey urgency, whereas someone else may see that you've raised your voice. You don't raise your voice unless you're angry or unless you want to disrespect somebody. And that's kind of an understanding on both ends, that like, understanding that what I've learned is that understanding that someone else innately is not the same, it does not communicate the same as you because they're from a different culture. Just understanding that alone kind of starts the conversation off in a different way, right? You're understanding that you're giving someone a little bit more grace and a little bit more understanding when we talk to them. We're giving them a little bit more grace and a little bit more understanding when, maybe there's a misunderstanding and we're like, hey, maybe I misunderstood that. Maybe you're not actually yelling at me. Maybe you're not actually being rude to me. Let's explore it and have a conversation about it. I think those conversations become a bit more easy to have and a bit more part of communication when we understand that we're all different, but we're also all the same, right? So I would say that's the experience that I've had from the management teaching side. I got a funny story about that. So, coming from New York, everything is like, rah, everyone's just, everything has to be done now. And everything's intense. And so when we talk about communicating in kitchens, specifically at least for me, in my old kitchens in New York, everything is like, I need you to clean that. I need you to pick that up, put that away. Everything is done in imperatives, right? So imperatives don't sound the same to people in other cultures, right? Also, understanding why I'm asking somebody to, for instance, clean something that they didn't make the mess, but I'm asking you to clean it, right? That's not something that I would have questioned back in New York, right? With the staff that I had there. But here, I'm working with a staff who has not worked in kitchens before. That's already a cultural difference, right? The culture of working in a kitchen. And then we have the culture of just how people speak to one another without explaining, me not understanding, hey, I need you to clean this up, but not understanding that I should probably tell you why I need you to clean this, why I'm asking you who did not make this mess to clean this up is something that I understand now. It's like, hey, let me not assume that you understand this. Let me explain to you why I'm doing this, right? And then that's like a learning lesson. That's a learning experience, right? That's what we all go through. Silvia, you want to say something?
And I have a learning lesson too from Comal, and the same with the Syrians, because it's the most people that we spend more time, because it's the more I would say like more eventually is coming together most time in Comal. But I remember the daughter of Bian was working at Comal also, and one time, you know, they are teaching us how to be set like in a role, like the chef, the prep, the dishwasher, and whatever. So I remember one day Sarah was part of the crew, and she was a prep, and was other person that has to wash dishes, that was Vian. And then I told her, oh, you know, you shouldn't be washing the dishes, should be your mom washing the dishes. And then she says, no, it's in my culture, whoever is the youngest has to wash the dishes. So I cannot do it in the kitchen. Doesn't matter if here the chef told me I have to be this more higher than my mom, I cannot let her wash the dishes. So that was kind of my learning in the kitchen about you need to learn some other things and more the culture of other persons, so you understand the roles in your kitchen. For me, was a learning, because now I know if any of them had a youngest person in the kitchen, is the one that is responsible to wash the dishes. And I didn't know it until I was in Comal, and I think I like the idea from learning that thing, because I think if in other places happens, I will know now.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's I think that's what Comal is really good at, is kind of really connecting these different cultures and individuals. You know, like Silvia said, you know, we serve mostly immigrant and refugee women, and so this has become like a big family, right? The sharing of the cultures, you learn about each other, you learn about how to communicate with each other, you learn about you have the ups and you have the downs, but you do end up overall, I think, seeing the similarities, and I think that that's what connects us, right? Understanding those similarities and seeing that, oh, those are there, and then those differences show us how we're individuals, right? They show us they give us our little flares of personality, whether we identify with this part of a culture or another part of a culture. I wanted to talk about with you guys, you know, Comal is at its core, it's a food training program. And I mentioned earlier, and Silvia touched on it as well, how we use food at home and how food is, you know, we can all kind of agree food is a major part of culture in general. If we took a poll, I think most people, when they say, tell us what you think about when you think of culture, I think we'd see food in there a lot. So that being said, part of Comal, the name is Comal Heritage Food Incubator, right? Part of the mission, the name that the women came up with is to actually use food to communicate heritage, right? And so part of that is, you know, when we think about communicating heritage, and I don't know if it's something that everyone thinks about initially. I certainly did not, to be honest, to be fair. When I think about food, when I think about heritage, is that who are you trying to communicate this heritage to? Because I'm not sure if that. I think that's a major part of of communicating your heritage and cross-cultural communication is understanding if you're going to have cross-cultural communication, who's doing the communicating, right? Who are the cultures involved in this? I think so. Part of cross-cultural communication is that kind of understanding that, you know, there's this culture that's considered the, lack of a better term, norm, right? That is usually the audience that you want to communicate to when you're the other culture. And I think at Comal, we are the other culture, but we're trying to show other people that, you know, they can be the other culture too. And this is a norm somewhere. This is a norm somewhere. And we want to communicate that heritage to you. So how do we do that, right? We talk about it a lot at Comal. Like, so how do you want to plate that? You want to plate it that way? Or do you want to serve it that way? What are you going to call the dish? If you're going to call it by a name, how are we going to explain to the guest who doesn't necessarily understand, I am stuck on this, pupusa or gordita. We were talking about it earlier, but who doesn't understand exactly like what it is. How do you explain, you know, this dish to the guest, right? Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Silvia?
Yeah, at the beginning when I started my business, like Catrina, I was thinking how to let know people and how they can understand when they see me, they see some traditional person. And I said, not just because of the way I wear or how I look, it's about my business. So one of the reasons I choose La Catrina is because it's very traditional in Mexico. She represents the Lady of Death. And I like the color because it's very colorful. So that's why I like that Lady of Death, La Catrina. And that's why I choose it. But then I start thinking about, okay, the menu. And then the same as I talked to Chef before, in Mexico City, we have a lot of street food. And for example, when I come here, I want to put in my menu quesadillas, and I start selling quesadillas, but the quesadillas for people here is not the same quesadilla that I make in Mexico City. So then I have to start thinking about what I want to do. I really want to call it quesadilla the way I want, because we do the empanadas. That's the way they call it here. So if I say quesadilla, people will think about flour tortilla with queso. But for me, the quesadillas in Mexico City is the corn tortilla, and I stuff it with whatever. I can put even, doesn't have to be cheese. And this is also a joke. Some people says, I think a quesadilla just have queso. No, for all the quesadilla has chicken, has pork, can have veggies as an empanada. But then I start thinking about, okay, I told people, I make quesadillas, and people think about flour tortilla. So then I have to decide what to do. If promoted as a quesadilla, and how long it's going to take me for people to learn about my quesadilla, or call it empanada, corn empanada that I call it in my menu. I put it in my menu as an empanada, corn empanada. So was kind of a learning for me, and I really would like to preserve my heritage culture. And sometimes it's hard for me to come out from that thing, you know, like have to let go. And okay, I will call it quesadilla, or the same as the gordita and pupusas. When they saw me making gorditas, we do it the same way round, and we stuff it inside, but we fry them, or we put it in the flat iron thing to cook them. But some people come and ask me, oh, are you making pupusas? And I said, no, I'm making gorditas. And they start asking me, what's the difference about gorditas and pupusas? And I really tell them the difference is just the inside, how you prepare the inside, the stuff, and the things that you put on the top. So to me, I was like, okay, should I call it pupusa? But I am not from El Salvador. And if I put it in my menu and I am from Mexico, they are going to say, what I am selling pupusas if I am from Mexico City? So it's kind of hard for me, because I really would like La Catrina to preserve the culture that the people think about, really like my heritage, like how we make the food like traditionally way. So I'm trying to work on that. I know my menu, and that's why sometimes I teach classes. I teach some classes sometimes in Museo de las Américas, some other places, so people know about how I call it, how I make them, and how I call it that way. So I would like Catrina to preserve the culture, but the same, not just the food, like everything, my traditions. For example, my daughter was dancing folkloric. So sometimes in some of my events, I include my daughter dancing. So to make them like, all together, like a Mexican party, so they learn more about what is my culture, because now I understand some people think about Mexican food like greasy, too spicy, or just have like one certain idea about Mexican food, and I am working on teach them that it's not just that. We are not just chile and greasy things, that we can make food healthy too, and we have a lot of food that is very healthy. So that would be my experience or my comment about that.
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely an experience that I think a lot of immigrants face coming to this country, right? My parents themselves, they're from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm first generation, and they would always tell me stories about, they have a dish called callaloo, which is dasheen leaf, which is from the family of taro, cocoyam. Very hard to find in New York when I was younger. A little bit easier now, but to do that, the closest thing you could find is really spinach, right? So callaloo for me growing up was spinach and okra instead of dasheen leaf and okra. But I think you see that across a lot of cultures, and it's kind of mirrors cross-cultural communication, right? It's part of cross-cultural communication. Not necessarily communicating like in a conversation, but you're communicating this part of your culture. And so you have the on one hand, you have the one culture who's kind of integrating into the mainstream culture, but wants to preserve their culture. And so how do you do that, right? What kind of accommodations do you have to make to communicate that culture? And I think a lot of the questions are like, are you willing to make those accommodations, right? Will you be able to still communicate the message that you want to communicate with any accommodations you need to make to either complete the idea? In this case, it would be the pupusa gordita or the callaloo that I'm talking about, right? Or do you just say, hey, you know what? This is just for me personally at home. We'll keep this to ourselves, right? I think that's definitely a challenge that I think a lot of cultures face. In that, how do I retain my identity, but also share my identity with you and kind of make it palatable for you to digest? Since we're talking about food. So I think, we see it in, I think Chinese American is a good example too, when we think about Chinese American restaurants and the evolution of Chinese food when, coming across building the railroad. The history of having to build a railroad means that, Chinese labor, as it was what it was, came here, and, people had to eat, and then Chinese food was developed. And then you see this growth of Chinese American food now, because you have what you have and you have this culture. So how do you reconcile the two? And I think that's just like the never ending question that a lot of immigrants have, is how do I reconcile telling you who I am, and so that you understand it, but also understanding the audience that we are talking to, and how do I communicate that the best I can? Anything else that you wanted to add to that, Silvia?
I think I comment most of the things that I want about that kind of bridge of communication about food, and how to make people to learn about my culture and about the food. I think I have to work on willing on keeping few things the name it is,
Yeah.
and see how it works. Is that I do.
Yeah.
I opened my business in 2016 when Comal's opens, and I put few items in the menu. And from there to now, I've been changing few names to adapt to whatever is here.
Right.
Because of course I want my business grow, so I have to work a little bit about how to communicate people about my culture without losing my heritage. And I have to do like it's a learning for me.
Mm-hmm.
That is I really like it because it's a learning for me, and I think for people here too, that they start learning more things, and I start to adapt my items, my food on the menu about what those people know about it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's like a group effort, right? It's more than
Mm-hmm.
it's multidimensional. It's not
Mm-hmm.
we can't just like put it all on, you know, the Sylvias and my parents and immigrants coming over. To the onus can't just be on this community to explain and make people understand. I think having organizations like Comal, right, focus points, having programs like your innovation and your international studies program, innovation and help me out here, entrepreneurship, right? Yeah, innovation
Mm-hmm.
and entrepreneurship. Having programs like this and discussions like this is part of it, right? If the more we can make active discussions like this a part of our culture here, then you know being able cross cultural communication just becomes part of the culture, and it just becomes part of everything. You know, we like at Comal, we do the cooking classes. Sylvia's definitely been a part of it. We did the tortilla making classes. You know, a lesson on it's like, yeah, you learn how to make the tortillas, but beyond that, you know, why is cornmeal different in Mexico than in the States, right? Because it's not cornmeal in Mexico, right? We learn that it's the process of, you know, nixtamalization. There's a whole process that there's a history behind, which if you follow it leads up to why you see corn in the state that it is in Mexico versus the way it is in the States. And I think understanding that you can see the similarity in it, but then you can also see just the kind of ingenuity that people have, right? You have the same product, and in two different places, they dealt with it two different ways. I think more of these conversations than understanding that, yeah, there's a lot of differences, but those differences really came from like a lot of similarities. It's just the way it is. It's just the way that life is.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think,
It's a lot of learning there,
yeah.
and I was thinking about some other. I would say that another learning for me here in Denver was like um, the same as I told you, the way I'm going to project my business to people, and really working on trying to do it the most authentic that I can, even finding the ingredients that I need for my recipe.
Mm-hmm,
In Comal, that we do is we don't buy anything pre-made,
mm-hmm.
no sauces pre-made, nothing. So it's a learning for me too to find resources here, that I can find some resources that can make me like my heritage and my food to continue being the same. And so people understand the difference when they try it. They say, okay, this one, and I hear it many times like, oh, why you taste different from others? Because, and then I explain them, it's because I am trying to keep the authenticity of my food. So I'm trying to do it the most originally that I can. So that's why it tastes different. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is just a great conversation to have. I think this is what we're doing. I thank you for having this. This is great. This is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
And I don't
Well,
know if you have any question.
I do have a question or
Yeah.
two. So you guys have talked a little bit about navigating the differences when working with people of different cultures, especially in the kitchen, and just kind of learning those nuances and going forward from them. So I just wondered, Are those all kind of like in the moment learning processes, or are there things that you have done outside of those moments to like learn more about other cultures? Like, how do you approach that?
I would say that for me, it's in the moment. I think just happen in the moment, like there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. Definitely, a lot of it happens. I mean, it has to happen in the moment. But I think a lot of it happens less in the moment. The more we have conversations like this, and the more we have trainings like this, I think the more we have any kind of exposure where people are exposed to something different, it becomes less in the moment and more as part of the way you think. Right. So it kind of goes back to the way I was talking about how, in the beginning, I just, say something and not really think about how that other person was going to take what I was saying. It was really more about like, this is what I'm saying. You should just understand what I'm saying. Or not necessarily the words, but kind of just the emotion, the intent behind what I'm saying. Because one of the things I've learned, and this is from over the course of time, is that communication when in conversation is more than just the words that you say. It's more than the body language. It's more than any good intention you have behind what you say. It's all of it. It's how do you convey the emotion that you say sometimes. We have this in our when we have our meetings and roundtables, we have interpreters come in, because one thing we've learned is that even if like my slightly less than intermediate, okay, it's beginner Spanish. My beginner Spanish, like I can't really convey those things, right? I can't really convey the emotion and intent are not a tangible thing that you can translate, right? It really takes someone who understands both cultures and languages to be able to make that calculation. It's an equation in your head. Like it's, this emotion of urgency is communicated this way in this language, this culture. How do I communicate that in this language, this culture? Not everybody has the same thing, right? If you look at a simple thing like a comedy show or a drama from different cultures, right? It's different. What people find funny, they're two different things, and that comes from culture, culture. Sarcasm is a really good example of a non-tangible thing that does not communicate. You can say the same word, say it sarcastically, the same sentence, say it sarcastically, and some people will be like, I don't understand. Why are you being mean? And then somebody will be like, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. You're so mean. It's a really good thing to realize, that the more that we expose ourselves to different cultures, is the less that it seems like a conscious effort to understand the differences. What you're really doing is opening yourself up, or what I'm really doing is opening myself up to the possibility that somebody may not understand what I want to say exactly the way I want to say it. So I need to be a little bit more willing and open to work with that person, to have it be a two-way conversation as opposed to just a one-way lecture.
Yeah, I agree with Chef, because I remember those roundtables that you talk about, and even I speak Spanish the same as my other co-workers. I would say when they ask me sometimes to interpret something that we are talking about, maybe my interpretation from my city, from Mexico, for my growing, for my learning, whatever, can interpret that one different. And for other people can think about it, okay, it's her interpretation. So that's why we start getting interpreters, because the interpreters can do kind of like equal interpretation, and they don't think it's just something personal. And also, for example, people in Mexico City, we always talk about jokes. We make a lot of jokes when we talk, and we really talk about double sense a lot. So I start being aware about, don't talk about double sense or make those kind of jokes, because in other persons they might feel like, okay, this is, it's not a joke really, they take it like aggression, but for me it's a joke, but for other persons it's not really like the way they usually talk. So for me, that is a learning tool, that like, okay, I don't have to talk this kind of way, like funny way, because for some people they thinking maybe it's aggression or that I am saying something bad. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a follow-up to that, so I guess, how do you navigate when, since you are kind of learning these things in the moment, how do you navigate when you've realized that you've made an error or somebody doesn't understand what you're talking about or is offended? Like, how do you normally navigate that situation to kind of make amends or anything like that?
Sometimes it's hard to navigate in that exactly moment.
Hmm.
Really, really, for working in the kitchen, it is making it hard, because the same as I explained before, it depends from the other person, how open-minded they are, and how I wanted to communicate my apologize. Some people it opens when when you explain them. Like, to me, if I explain, okay, you know what I wanted to mean is this, and then they are, oh, okay, I understand now what you mean. Sometimes you have to let little bit time pass so then you explain it, because some
Hmm.
people, it's the way you learn. So you cannot say it sometimes in that time, in that moment, because that person maybe is mad in that moment, and doesn't matter what you say, and they are going to think like it's not right. So in the moment, if you know that person and that you know that you can talk and open the conversation to explain, then you do it. If not, then I let little bit time pass, and when I find the moment, then I do it.
Yeah, I think I agree fully. It's in the moment, it's always hard. If there's, it depends on what the miscommunication was, right? But overall, in general, I think that you always need a little space to breathe, right? And you always have to know when to take a break from a situation or from a conversation or from a misunderstanding. And I don't necessarily mean like an argument. It could just be like, hey, I don't know what the gordita means, and somebody's just not getting it. So, and maybe they're just like, oh, you mean a pupusa, right? And then maybe someone's like, no, I mean a gordita. And they're like, yeah, a pupusa. And you're like, no. And it's like, so there's a point where you just got to take a break. And then sometimes it's a lesson that you have to learn later. Or maybe it's the lesson that you learned there is applied later, is what I really mean. But I think definitely taking, when it comes to like just misunderstandings, uh, addressing them sooner than later is definitely something that needs to be done. As uncomfortable as it is, it just needs to be done. I think getting over the uncomfortableness of addressing the situation really clears the air. I find that usually by the end of all those conversations, any kind of animosity or misunderstanding goes away. And it'll happen again. There'll be something else, but hopefully it gets resolved faster because we remember the lesson that we learned last time, that both parties need to be a little bit more understanding. One party needs to be a bit more understanding that, oh, they're not used to me. And the other person needs to be understanding, oh, they're not used to me. And then the conversation is different. I think if we give people the benefit of the doubt, let's go into it and give them the benefit of the doubt. This person does not think any less of me than they do of themselves. It really helps the conversation because I think for the most part we don't think that I don't think anybody on this panel here is less than I am, and I don't think that anyone on this panel thinks I am less than they are. So when we have these conversations, if there's a misunderstanding, like they're not going to be like, oh, this guy Arden, he's just the worst. It's just I would hope that it's like, oh, let me ask why you asked me something this way or why you said something this way. I think not being afraid to ask why before misunderstanding is really key, because we realize that I don't know you, so I obviously don't know everything about the way you communicate. So if I don't understand something, if something that you say rubs me the wrong way, I should probably ask before assuming that this is just, you're offensive.
I have a good example. I remember we make one rule. Well, we have one rule in Comal that is like nobody can comment anything about food. Just Chef Arden can do it. And we make that rule because, for example, imagine Alexandra makes some enchiladas, and she put lettuce on top. And imagine I tell you the enchilada, oh, you know what? You should add some cheese. And you take it back. And you says, oh, she's criticizing my food and why we put this. And she said it's bad and doesn't look good and things like that. So
Yeah.
I think we address from the moment we learn, and we address few things that makes everybody happy and working together and no misunderstanding, because I remember that rule.
Yeah, I think that really boils down to having kind of like a moderating element to communication. So I think speaking of the in the moment kind of question that you're asking, how do you deal with it in the moment? That would be one way, right? So because there's a lot of room for miscommunication in that moment, because kitchens are fast paced, right? Someone's really like, hey, I worked really hard on this dish. I want to put it out. And then it gets put out. And then someone else is just like, oh, that's not the way I do it. And then it's just in the moment. And then they say, hey, maybe it's a suggestion, but it doesn't seem like that in the moment. And at that moment is not the right time to address it. So we add a moderating element, which is, only we have one person who's responsible for that kind of element, and because there's an understood flow of communication there. And so I think having something like that, where if you're having some kind of cross-cultural, wow, that's quite the alliteration, cross-cultural communication, when you're having some kind of event that requires cross-cultural communication, analyzing whether there are any potential pitfalls and how you can head them off at the pass is kind of a key element. Thank you for bringing that up, Silvia. A moderating element where you have like, hey, if this happens, then maybe the best way to solve it is not to like deal with it right now, but let's either, in a case like this, we'd say like, let's put it in a question in a chat and then we can discuss it later. Alex will get back to you on that question, right? There's certain moments when it's okay to address it at that moment. And then there's certain moments where you need to like kind of collect yourself and analyze the moment and then address it.
I think you both have made some really great points. And those can be applied, to all of us in so many different situations. I think you hit the nail on the head. Obviously, confrontation is challenging and uncomfortable. And I think you've offered some really great ideas of how to like address that, or maybe it's not the right time.
Yeah.
Asking clarifying questions.
And some people, and that's another thing, you said confrontation. And when we talk about work, confrontation is like number one up there, right? That you can't work with other people and not come across some sort of confrontation. And one thing we all realize is that cultures deal with confrontation differently, right? Some just like take it head on, right? And they're like, well, this is happening. We're having a confrontation. We're doing this until the confrontation's over. And then some cultures are just a little bit more reserved and don't really, if it doesn't need to be dealt with, it doesn't need to be dealt with until it needs to be dealt with. So I think that's something else to understand, to take note as well, that like confrontation is also dealt with differently among different cultures.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting us. And also for thinking of me to participate. I'm really happy, always happy to share my story or my culture. That's one of the other points of my business, that promote culture. So I'm really happy. that people invite me. So thank you, Alexandra, for inviting me.
Of course. Let us know too if there's any way we can support you guys and Comal and Focus Points, and if there's anything that we can do as well.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you very much.